The training hall was loud with voices. Cadets from many different worlds stood together in their shiny new uniforms. Their clothes had special shields built into them. Small computers showed information right in front of their eyes. Temperature controls kept them comfortable. Everything was new and expensive and powerful. Daehyun leaned against the wall. His friend stood next to him. The friend was a Vraxian with scales covering his body. They both watched as someone new walked into the hall. The new person was human. He wore simple dark clothes made of fabric. Just fabric, nothing special. No energy shields glowed around him. No powered joints helped him move. No helmet showed him computer information. He looked like he was wearing pajamas to a military school. Daehyun could not believe his eyes. He turned to his Vraxian friend and asked quietly if that was really just cloth. The Vraxian made a hissing sound. For his species, that sound meant laughter. He said the human looked like he came to military training in his sleeping clothes. Other cadets began to whisper. A Centaurian with 4 arms made a rude gesture. A Lumerian made of living crystal seemed to look down on the human. Even Hana, another human in the program, felt embarrassed to see someone from her own planet dressed so strangely. The newcomer walked through the crowd calmly. His face showed no emotion. His steps made no sound even though the floor was hard. He found a spot near the back and stood straight with his hands behind his back. Suddenly, a loud voice cut through all the talking. The command made everyone go quiet. Instructor Vector walked into the hall. He was a Craxi warrior with 4 eyes. Everyone knew he had fought in many battles across 50 star systems. His presence made the room feel different. More serious, Vector announced that they had a new transfer student. He told the human to step forward. The man in dark clothing moved smoothly through the crowd. As he passed Daehyun, the cadet whispered to his neighbor that he hoped the costume shop gave the human his money back. Some other cadets laughed quietly. But Vector heard them. His head turned toward the sound and the laughter stopped immediately. Everyone knew better than to laugh when Vector was watching. Vector asked Daehyun if he wanted to share his comment with the whole class. Daehyun stood up straighter. He said with respect that the human's uniform seemed very primitive for military training. He tried to sound polite, but everyone could hear what he really meant. There was a pause. Then Vector made a clicking sound with his mouthparts. Those who knew him understood that sound. It meant he found something grimly funny. Vector said that the cadets did not understand. His voice carried a heavy weight that made several students shift nervously. He told them clearly that the human was a ninja. Confusion spread through the room. Most of them had never heard that word before. It meant nothing to them. They looked at each other wondering what a ninja was. Vector explained that the human named Minsu came from a special training program on Earth. His primitive uniform represented a fighting tradition, older than some of their entire species. The techniques came from before most of them had even discovered fire. The Vraxian next to Daehyun leaned close and muttered that it was still just cloth, though. Vector heard this too. His hearing was excellent. He asked the Vraxian named Borum if he would like to test how effective just cloth could be. The challenge hung in the air. Borum's scales changed color with pride. If he backed down now, everyone would think he was weak. He said yes. He would be honored to demonstrate proper combat technique against the human. Vector pointed to the sparring circle in the center of the room. He asked Minsu to step into it. The human bowed slightly and walked to the middle of the ring. He did not take any fighting stance that the others recognized. He just stood there with his weight balanced. His breathing was steady. His dark eyes watched his opponent with quiet focus. Borum turned on his armor's power systems. Extra strength flooded into his muscles. Computer displays painted targeting information across his vision. He was 50 kilos heavier than the human. His natural Vraxian strength was already formidable. With technology helping him, he should win easily. Everyone thought the fight would be over in seconds. How could simple cloth compete with advanced military armor? How could an unarmed human defeat a Vraxian warrior with computer assistance? Vector said one simple word: begin. Borum charged forward fast. His powered sprint should have been impossible to avoid. The armor made him move like a blur. His fist came forward with hydraulic force behind it. The punch should have ended the match before it really started. But Minsu was not there anymore. The human had moved, but not the way anyone expected. It was not the fast, jerky movement of powered armor. It was something else. Smooth, efficient, natural. The tactical computers could not track it properly. Borum's fist hit only empty air. His momentum carried him forward. He was suddenly off balance because his punch had hit nothing. He felt cloth brush against his scales. Then the world tilted sideways. The Vraxian crashed to the mat with a loud sound. His armor absorbed most of the impact, but his pride was badly hurt. Above him, Minsu stood calmly in the exact spot where Borum had been a moment before. Somehow the human had used Borum's own speed and strength against him. The watching cadets stirred uneasily. That had been unexpected. Very unexpected. Borum rolled to his feet with a growl. He hissed that it was just luck. This time he would be more careful. He turned on his armor's combat prediction programs and began to circle slowly. He watched for any opening to attack. Minsu turned slowly to track him. He still did not take any formal fighting stance. To most observers, he looked almost relaxed. But Hana, watching from the side, noticed something others missed. She saw Minsu's eyes. They were not focused on just one spot like their training taught. His eyes seemed to see everything at once. The way Borum distributed his weight, the tiny adjustments of his clawed feet, the subtle movements in his shoulders that would come before any strike. Borum faked left and struck right. It was a combination that had won him 3 tournaments. His targeting computer said he had a 92% chance of hitting. Minsu stepped into the strike. Not away from it as every computer would recommend. Not to the side either. He moved forward and inside Borum's reach. In that close space, the powered fist had no leverage. The armor's strength became a problem instead of an advantage. What happened next was too fast for most people to follow. Minsu's hand touched Borum's extended arm at 3 precise points. The Vraxian's aggressive roar turned into a confused gurgle. His entire arm went limp. The servos in his own muscles suddenly stopped responding. Before Borum could understand what happened, Minsu had moved behind him. There was no visible strike, no dramatic technique. The human simply touched the Vraxian's neck below his helmet. Borum's legs buckled under him. He collapsed to the floor. He was still conscious but completely unable to move. His armor flashed confused error messages about nerve input failures. The entire fight had taken less than 5 seconds. Complete silence filled the training hall. No one could believe what they had just seen. Then Vector began to speak as if he had just watched a normal drill instead of something that challenged everything they thought they knew about combat. Vector explained to the silent room that Minsu practiced an ancient earth discipline called ninjutsu. The people who mastered these skills were called ninja. They were warriors who operated in shadows on their world. They specialized in spying, assassination, infiltration, and guerrilla warfare. They fought in ways that others did not expect. While Vector spoke, Minsu helped the still paralyzed Borum to his feet. He pressed certain points on the Vraxian's body and function slowly returned. Borum could move again, but he looked shocked and confused. Daehyun found his voice. He asked the instructor how such techniques could be relevant in modern warfare. The human had no armor and no weapons. How could that matter when fighting with energy guns and force fields? Vector made his clicking sound again. He asked Minsu to show everyone his equipment. The human nodded once. From inside the folds of his dark clothing, he pulled out various items. He laid them carefully on a nearby table. The cadets crowded closer to see. There were weapons, but they looked nothing like what was in the Academy's armory. No energy cells. No targeting computers. No powered parts. Instead, there were throwing stars made of simple metal. Their edges caught the light and looked very sharp. A length of chain with weights at both ends, several small blades, a coil of thin strong cord, packets of powder, tiny metal tubes, small spheres that Minsu said were smoke bombs, sharp metal pieces called caltrops designed to pierce even military boots. Someone in the crowd murmured that these things were primitive, but this time the word sounded different. Not mocking, wary, nervous even. Vector corrected the speaker. He said the word was not primitive but effective. None of these items would appear on a security scan looking for energy weapons or technology. None of them needed power cells or maintenance. All of them could be made from commonly available materials. And in the hands of a trained ninja, each one was lethal. Hana stepped forward. Her curiosity was stronger than her caution now. She asked how Minsu had disabled Borum's arm. Was it some kind of pressure point technique? Minsu spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet but clear. He explained that the body has pathways for energy and nerve signals. A technique called Kyusho Jitsu taught practitioners to disrupt these pathways. It worked on any species with a nervous system. Some targets were universal across all species. Others had to be learned specifically for each type of alien body. Daehyun asked with disbelief if Minsu had memorized the anatomy of every species in the Galactic Defense Force. That would be an impossible amount of information. Minsu replied calmly that he had memorized 57 species so far. He had 43 more to study. He said it as if it was normal, as if everyone should be able to do this. The training hall was absolutely silent now. The cadets looked at the human in his simple clothing with completely new eyes. This was not some historical performer. This was not a cultural hobbyist. This was a weapon honed by centuries of refinement. He was wrapped in cloth instead of armor because armor was just another limitation that could be exploited. Bektar's voice cut through their thoughts. He told them that technology was a tool. A powerful tool, yes, but it was not a substitute for skill, discipline, and tactical thinking. The ninja understood this principle deeply. They built their entire fighting philosophy around the idea that the greatest weapon was not the one you carried. The greatest weapon was what you were, what you had become through training. He told them to remember this lesson when they faced an enemy who did not fight the way they expected, when they encountered someone who did not follow their assumptions about how combat should work. The days after that demonstration were strange for everyone at the academy. Minsu became famous, though he seemed completely uninterested in the attention. He trained alone in the early morning hours before anyone else was awake. He ate his meals quickly without talking. He spoke only when necessary. The other cadets whispered about him constantly, but he did not seem to notice or care. Daehyun found himself particularly fascinated. After making fun of Minsu at first, he now felt a burning need to understand what he had witnessed. It was not just wounded pride, though, that was certainly part of it. It was the sudden, uncomfortable realization that his expensive armor and high-tech weapons might not be the advantage he had always assumed they were. One evening, he found Minsu in a side training room. The human was moving through a series of slow, deliberate forms. The movements looked almost like a dance. Each position flowed seamlessly into the next with perfect control. Daehyun said from the doorway that it was beautiful. Minsu completed his form before acknowledging the interruption. He said it was called kata, practicing movements until they became instinct, until the body could do them without thinking. Daehyun stepped into the room. He said he wanted to apologize for mocking Minsu's uniform. He had been ignorant. He had not understood what he was looking at. Minsu inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. He said that Daehyun had seen cloth where there was technique. This was natural for those who relied on technology. It was not shameful to not know something. Daehyun asked if Minsu could teach him. The words came out in a rush. Not all of it, of course. He knew that would take years. But something, anything. The human looked at him for a long moment. Then he asked why. Why did Daehyun want to learn? Daehyun said he had realized something while watching Minsu fight Boram. He had been training his whole life to use his armor. If he ever lost it, he would be defenseless. But Minsu was never defenseless. He wanted to understand how that was possible. Minsu's expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened slightly. He told Daehyun to meet him in this room tomorrow at 5 in the morning. He should wear light clothing, no armor. The next morning, Daehyun arrived early. He found that Minsu was already there, but there were also 3 other cadets present. Hana was there, so was a Lumerian named Sura, and surprisingly Boram the Vraxian was there too. He looked uncomfortable but determined. Minsu said this was good. He would teach them as he was taught. But first they had to understand something important. Ninjutsu was not just about fighting. It was about awareness, adaptation, and survival. A ninja's greatest strength was not physical power. It was knowledge and preparation. He had them begin with basic exercises, balance drills, breathing techniques, learning to move silently across different surfaces. It seemed almost absurdly simple after the high-intensity combat training they were used to. They had expected to learn deadly strikes and secret techniques. Instead, they were walking slowly and breathing. Sura asked why they were walking in slow motion. Her crystalline form caught and refracted the early morning light as she spoke. She said this was not combat training. Minsu replied that it was exactly combat training. Before you can move quickly, you must move correctly. Before you can strike an enemy, you must reach an enemy. Stealth was the ninja's first weapon, the most important weapon. He demonstrated by crossing the training room at a normal walking pace. His footfalls made absolutely no sound. The dark fabric of his uniform whispered against itself, but even that was barely audible. It seemed impossible. Then he told them to watch carefully. He walked back across the room, but this time deliberately making noise. His steps echoed on the floor. His clothing rustled loudly. He asked them what the difference was. Hana answered immediately. She said it was how he placed his feet, rolling from heel to toe the first time, flat-footed the second time. Minsu said that was correct, but there was also posture, weight distribution, and awareness of surroundings. He had avoided a loose floor panel. He had moved with the air circulation rather than against it. These details seemed small, insignificant. But in combat, they meant the difference between survival and death. They practiced for hours. By the end of the first session, all 4 cadets were exhausted. Not from physical exertion, but from the intense concentration required. Every movement had to be deliberate, every step measured and considered. It was harder than any powered armor drill they had endured in their regular training. Over the following weeks, Minsu's early morning class became a regular part of the academy routine. Word spread among the cadets. More and more asked if they could join. Minsu accepted all of them. He was patient and methodical in his instruction. No question was too simple. No student was turned away. He taught them to observe their environment, to truly observe it, not just glance at it, but to see the small details that might save their lives someday. The angle of shadows that revealed the time of day. The direction of wind that could carry sound or scent. The subtle sounds that indicated movement or danger even when nothing was visible. He showed them how to use everyday objects as weapons. How a datapad could break someone's grip when used correctly. How a meal tray could block a blade. How even the environment itself could be turned against an enemy. Loose floor tiles, hanging fixtures, the play of light and shadow. Everything became a potential tool. One morning, Minsu told them something important. He said they all relied too much on their scanners and sensors. They trusted their technology more than their own senses. He asked them what would happen when the technology failed. When it was jammed, when the enemy knew they had it and used it against them, Borum replied automatically that they would switch to backup systems. That was standard procedure. Always have redundancy. Minsu asked what happened if those backup systems failed too. What would they do then? Uncomfortable silence filled the room. No one had a good answer. They had never really thought about it. Technology always worked. Systems had backups. Backups had backups. The idea of being completely without technological support seemed impossible. Minsu explained that their eyes, ears, nose, and sense of touch were their primary sensors. These were what they should trust first. Technology should enhance these natural senses, not replace them. A ninja trusted their instincts first and their tools second, never the other way around. This philosophy was alien to most of them. They had been raised in a culture of technological dependence. From birth, they had been surrounded by computers and sensors and automated systems. The idea of trusting something as unreliable as biological senses seemed almost primitive. But gradually understanding began to dawn. In simulation exercises, the cadets who had been training with Minsu started to perform differently. They checked corners before their tactical displays could warn them. They detected ambushes through subtle environmental cues rather than sensor warnings. They moved with a quietness and efficiency that surprised their regular instructors. Instructor Vector noticed the changes. During one training evolution, he pulled Minsu aside after the exercise ended. The other cadets filed out, leaving the 2 of them alone in the observation room. Vector said that Minsu was changing how the cadets thought. Not just teaching them new techniques, but fundamentally altering their approach to problems. Minsu replied that he was teaching them to adapt. That was what Vector had asked for when he put Minsu in the ring with Borum that first day. Vector said he had asked for no such thing. He had not explicitly requested this. Minsu pointed out that Vector had put him in that ring knowing exactly what would happen. The instructor had wanted the other cadets to see that there were different ways to fight, different approaches to combat, different philosophies that could all be valid. Vector's mandibles clicked in acknowledgement. He admitted that the Galactic Defense Force was facing enemies who did not follow standard rules of engagement. Pirates who adapted faster than military doctrine could respond. Insurgents who turned advanced technology against those who relied on it. The force needed soldiers who could think like Minsu, soldiers who could be unpredictable. Minsu said with the faintest hint of a smile that unpredictable was what ninja did best. It was the core of their entire philosophy. The final evaluation for the combat tactics course was legendary at the academy. It was the test that separated adequate soldiers from great ones. Cadets would be deployed individually into a simulated hostile environment. Their objective was to reach an extraction point while enemy forces hunted them. The simulation used holographic projections, force feedback systems, and real environmental hazards. It was as close to actual combat as training could safely achieve. Failure meant starting the entire course over from the beginning. Success meant graduating to the advanced combat program and moving one step closer to becoming a real soldier. The cadets were equipped with standard combat gear for the test: light armor, a pulse rifle with limited ammunition, a combat knife, basic scanning equipment. They would face simulated enemy patrols, automated defenses, and environmental obstacles. The average completion time was 4 hours. The academy record was 93 minutes set by a legendary cadet 3 years ago. Minsu requested special permission to complete the evaluation in his traditional clothing. He wanted to go in without the standard equipment. After a heated debate among the instructors, Vector approved the request. The other cadets thought Minsu was insane. Going in with no armor and no weapons? It was suicide. Daehyun asked Hana if she really thought Minsu could succeed without equipment. Hana replied quietly that Minsu had weapons, just not the ones the academy scanners would recognize. Over the past weeks, she had spent more time observing Minsu than anyone else. She understood better than most what he was capable of. The observation room was packed when Minsu's evaluation began. Cadets and instructors alike crowded around the holographic displays. Multiple camera feeds showed different angles of the simulation zone. It was a dense urban environment. Ruined buildings, tight alleyways, open areas covered with overlapping fields of fire. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. Minsu appeared at the insertion point on a rooftop overlooking the city. For a long moment he simply stood there. His dark clothing made him nearly invisible against the pre-dawn sky. Then he moved. What happened next would be discussed in tactical classes for years to come. It would be analyzed frame by frame, debated endlessly, used as an example in countless training scenarios. Instead of heading directly toward the objective, Minsu went sideways. He scaled down the building using techniques that made the watching cadets catch their breath. No climbing equipment, no safety lines, just fingers and toes finding holds that barely seemed to exist. He reached the ground and immediately disappeared into shadow. The simulation's enemy artificial intelligence was programmed to detect movement, thermal signatures, and electromagnetic emissions. These were the 3 main ways to find an infiltrator. Minsu produced almost none of these signatures. He moved in absolute silence using the environment's natural shadows. When holographic civilians moved through the area, he moved with them. His timing was perfect. When he had to cross open ground, he did so with such fluid grace that observers tracking his position on displays often lost him between camera angles. One instructor muttered in frustration that Minsu had disappeared. The thermal overlay should show him clearly. Where was he? Vector pointed to a faint distortion in the shadows. Minsu had pressed himself into a small alcove. His breathing was controlled to the point where his thermal signature blended with the cooler building material around him. He had made himself invisible not through technology, but through perfect control of his own body. A patrol passed within 2 meters of his hiding spot. 4 heavily armed holographic enemies scanning aggressively for any sign of an intruder. They never saw him. They walked right past and continued their route none the wiser. Minsu continued his approach, but he was not just avoiding enemies. He was learning them, studying their patrol patterns, their response times, their communication protocols, how they moved, how they thought, how they reacted to potential threats. 20 minutes into the evaluation, he had gathered more intelligence about the opposition than most cadets acquired during their entire 4-hour run. Then came the automated defenses, a large courtyard filled with sensor nodes and automated turrets. Every cadet had to pass through this area to reach the extraction point. There was no way around it. Most cadets tried to shoot their way through or find an alternate route. Both approaches typically resulted in heavy simulated casualties. Minsu did neither. He produced one of his smoke bombs. The simple chemical mixture was invisible to security scanners that only looked for sophisticated technology. He threw it not into the courtyard but into an adjacent building where he had noticed a ventilation intake during his reconnaissance. Within moments, thick smoke began pouring from multiple vents across the entire defensive zone. The automated systems were programmed to respond to potential threats. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant potential danger. The systems went into high alert immediately. Turrets swiveled, scanning through the smoke. Alarms activated throughout the area. Enemy patrols converged on the courtyard from all directions, thinking they had found the infiltrator. While every enemy asset focused on the diversion, Minsu went around the entire area. He scaled a completely different building using a route he had identified earlier. He crossed via rooftop, moving from building to building. Then he dropped into the objective area from above. It was a direction the defenses were not oriented to cover because no one expected an approach from that angle. In the observation room, Vector breathed a single word. Brilliant. Minsu had turned the enemy's own security systems against them, made their strength into their weakness. But the evaluation was not over yet. The final challenge was a direct confrontation that could not be avoided by design. A simulated enemy commander in a fortified position surrounded by guards. Standard protocol called for a tactical assault, using firepower and coordination to overwhelm the defenders, fighting through the security to reach the target. Minsu infiltrated instead. He approached the fortification from below, through a drainage system that was not marked on any tactical map, but he had noted it during his initial surveillance. Every detail observed, every possibility considered. He emerged inside the perimeter with water dripping silently from his clothing. The observation room was absolutely silent as they watched him move through the compound. He passed guards who never turned around. He climbed stairwells that should have been watched. He entered rooms that should have been secure. His path seemed impossibly lucky until Daehyun suddenly understood what he was really seeing. He whispered to those around him that Minsu had memorized the patrol pattern from outside the compound. The ninja was moving through the gaps in coverage. He knew exactly when to enter each area, when each guard would be looking away, when each corridor would be empty. It was not luck. It was perfect timing based on perfect observation. Minsu reached the command room. The simulated enemy commander sat at a tactical display surrounded by advisors and bodyguards. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the compound. Someone had finally traced the smoke diversion back to an infiltration attempt. The commander barked orders, sending forces to seal all potential entry points. Lock down the facility. Find the intruder. But they never thought to look up. Minsu dropped from a ventilation shaft directly above the commander's position. His training blade touched the holographic enemy's neck before anyone in the room could react. The simulation immediately registered a kill. Objective complete. Evaluation passed. Total elapsed time, 38 minutes. A new academy record, not just beating the old one but shattering it completely. The observation room erupted in chaos. Instructors were already calling up the recording to analyze every movement and decision. The time was not just impressive. It suggested fundamental flaws in how they had designed the evaluation. Or perhaps it revealed fundamental misconceptions about what combat could be. When Minsu emerged from the simulation chamber, he found himself surrounded by cadets asking questions. Everyone wanted to know how he did it, what he was thinking, how he made his decisions. He answered patiently, explaining his reasoning, his observations, and the principles that had guided his choices. Hana pushed through the crowd. She said that Minsu had not just been completing the objective. He had been teaching them something, a lesson within the test. What was it? Minsu considered the question carefully before answering. He said that the most powerful technique was the one your enemy did not expect. The entire enemy defense had been built around assumptions. Assumptions about what equipment an infiltrator would have, how they would move, what routes they would take, how they would think. By being what the enemy could not predict, Minsu had made all their preparation irrelevant. Vector approached, having heard the last part of the conversation. He added that this was what made a ninja truly dangerous, not their weapons or their techniques alone, but their ability to exist outside the enemy's decision-making framework, to be the threat that was not planned for, the attack that was not anticipated. Word of Minsu's performance spread beyond the academy within days. The Galactic Defense Forces Strategic Command took immediate notice. Within a week, 3 high-ranking officers arrived to observe Minsu's training methods. They interviewed cadets who had worked with him. They watched his morning classes. They reviewed recordings of his evaluation run frame by frame. Their visit coincided with the Academy's semi-annual war games. This was a massive simulation that pitted entire cadet units against each other in complex operational scenarios. Hundreds of participants, multiple objectives, days of continuous operations. It was the closest thing to real war that training could provide. Strategic Command requested a special addition to the exercise this time. They wanted to see something different, something that would test new concepts. Minsu and his small group of dedicated students would operate as an independent element. They were designated the Shadow Unit. Their objective was to infiltrate and disable the command structure of the opposing force without being detected. They would have no armor, no standard weapons, no electronic communication equipment, just the techniques they had learned over the past months. The opposing force was commanded by the Academy's top tactical cadet, a brilliant strategist named Quan. He was given full intelligence that an infiltration unit would be attempting to reach his command post. He was told to prepare accordingly. He had every advantage. Quan established multiple security layers around his position. Constant patrols on varying routes, sensor nets that overlapped to eliminate blind spots. A quick reaction force specifically trained to counter special operations techniques. He studied every infiltration method in the military database. He prepared for everything. It should have been impossible for the Shadow Unit to succeed. The Shadow Unit gathered in the pre-dawn darkness at their insertion point. 6 individuals against a full mechanized company, with advanced sensors and prepared defenses. Minsu looked at each of them in turn. Daehyun, Hana, Borum, Sura, and a newcomer named Jiho who had only been training with them for 3 weeks. Minsu spoke softly, reminding them of what they had learned. They were not weaker without their armor. They were free, unencumbered. They were not limited without their scanners. They were aware, using all their senses. They did not need to fight every enemy they encountered. They needed only to accomplish the objective. Everything else was just distraction. They moved out, disappearing into the simulation zone like smoke dispersing in wind. Like shadows fading at dawn. Like ghosts that had never been there at all. In the command center, Quan studied his displays with confidence. All sectors were reporting normal status. His sensor grid was operating at 100% efficiency. He had prepared for every possibility. The Shadow Unit would not get within a kilometer of his position without being detected. He was certain of this. What Quan did not know was that the Shadow Unit had never intended to approach his command center directly. That would be predictable. Expected. They were already inside his perimeter. Daehyun had infiltrated with a supply convoy 2 hours before the exercise officially began. He was hidden in a way that no scanner would detect. Not with technology, but with misdirection and physical concealment. Simple methods that worked because no one expected them. Hana had approached from the waterway that security deemed too well monitored to be a threat. She used a breathing technique Minsu had taught her. It allowed her to stay submerged far longer than any scanner would account for. The sensors looked for normal human breath-holding times. She exceeded them by minutes. Borum had simply walked through the main gate wearing a crude disguise. It exploited how the Vraxian guards recognized their own species. His profile was so close to expected patterns that the security artificial intelligence never flagged him as suspicious. He was hiding in plain sight. Meanwhile, Minsu, Sura, and Jiho created the diversion the enemy expected. They made just enough noise at the perimeter to draw attention. Just enough movement to trigger sensors. All eyes turned outward, watching for the infiltration everyone knew was coming. While the real penetration proceeded unnoticed from within, the operation unfolded with precision that shocked the observers watching from the control room. The Shadow Unit did not attack anything. They did not sabotage equipment. They did not trigger any alarms. They simply moved through the enemy position like water flowing through cracks, finding every gap in security. Every moment of inattention, every assumption that could be exploited. Daehyun reached the auxiliary power station. He planted a non-electronic timer device. When it activated, the backup generators would shut down. It would look like a mechanical malfunction. Nothing suspicious. Just bad luck and poor maintenance. Hana accessed the command bunker's environmental systems through a maintenance shaft. The shaft was not on any security schematic because it had been deemed too small for infiltration. She did not need to hack any computers. She just introduced one of Minsu's smoke compounds into the ventilation system. Time to activate at the critical moment. Borum positioned himself in the communications hub. He found a blind spot in the sensor coverage that he had identified during his reconnaissance. His task was simple: observe and relay information when the time came. He used light signals that no electronic warfare system would detect. Old methods that still worked. While all this happened, Minsu, Sura, and Jiho kept the perimeter security focused outward. They created the illusion of an imminent assault through careful manipulation of sensors and patrol patterns. The enemy saw what they expected to see, what they were prepared to see. 4 hours into the exercise, Quan received the first indication that something was wrong. One of his officers reported that they had lost contact with Patrol 7. The patrol was not responding to communication attempts. Quan ordered a team to investigate immediately. He also increased sensor sweeps on the outer perimeter. He assumed the shadow unit was probing for weaknesses in his defenses. Testing his responses? Standard infiltration tactics. The investigation team found Patrol 7 exactly where they should be, performing their duties normally. They had never stopped responding to communication requests, but for exactly 3 minutes their communications had been intercepted. Their responses had been replaced with recordings. This created a window of uncertainty. A small gap. The shadow unit had used that gap to move assets into position. By the time Quan realized his command center had been compromised, it was already over. The lights went out as the backup generators failed. Smoke filled the compartment, triggering emergency protocols. Alarms blared. In the chaos and confusion, Minsu appeared beside Quan's command chair. A training blade rested gently against the commander's neck. Minsu spoke quietly. Objective complete. The opposing force was now without command and control. Communications disrupted. Leadership neutralized. The exercise was over. The shadow unit had won. The observation center erupted in heated discussion. Some instructors insisted the exercise had been unfair, that the shadow unit had exploited loopholes in the simulation design. They argued that real enemies would not be able to do such things. Others argued that was exactly the point. Real enemies would not follow the rules either. They would exploit every weakness, use every advantage, fight in unexpected ways. That was the nature of actual combat. General Yura silenced the debate with a single gesture. The four-armed Centaurian was the most senior officer present. She had seen actual combat across 3 decades and 5 major conflicts. Her voice carried absolute authority that could not be questioned. She announced that this exercise had revealed a critical vulnerability in their tactical doctrine. The Galactic Defense Force had become so dependent on technological advantages that they had forgotten the most fundamental principle of warfare: adapt or die. These cadets, led by Minsu's training, had exploited that weakness brilliantly. They had not beaten the opposing force's technology. They had made it irrelevant. She turned to Minsu directly. She said she was authorizing a new training program. He would develop a curriculum based on his ninjutsu principles. It would be adapted for integration with existing combat doctrine. Every soldier in the Galactic Defense Force needed to learn to think the way he had taught these cadets to think. Minsu replied with respect that ninjutsu took years to master. Decades, even. What the general was asking was not possible in standard training cycles. There was simply not enough time. General Yura clarified her intent. She was not asking him to make every soldier a ninja. That would indeed be impossible. She was asking him to change how they thought about combat, about technology, about their own capabilities, to teach them to question assumptions, to exploit enemy expectations, to understand that sometimes the most effective weapon was the one nobody was looking for. Minsu bowed in acceptance. This he could do. This was not about techniques but about mindset. About philosophy, that could be taught much faster than physical skills. 3 standard years later, the changes were evident throughout the Galactic Defense Force. Combat doctrine had evolved in ways that would have seemed radical before Minsu's arrival. Reconnaissance units now included shadow specialists trained in infiltration techniques that did not rely on cloaking technology. Assault teams practiced breaching operations without powered tools. They learned to exploit architectural weaknesses and human error. Even ship-to-ship combat tactics had been revised to account for the principle that the most effective attack was the unexpected one. The changes had not been universal or immediate. Military institutions resisted change, especially change that seemed to question decades of established practice and tradition. But the results spoke for themselves in ways that could not be argued with. Daehyun, now a lieutenant, commanded a special operations team. He led a mission to disable a pirate stronghold that had eluded conventional assault for 2 years. His unit approached not with gunships and powered armor, but with patience and observation. They studied the facility for a week, identifying patterns, finding weaknesses, noting moments of vulnerability. When they finally struck, it was surgical. No alarms sounded. No casualties occurred. No dramatic firefight erupted. The pirate leadership simply woke up one morning to find themselves in custody and their entire organization dismantled. Hana became an instructor herself. She taught survival and evasion techniques that combined technological tools with fundamental awareness skills. Her students learned to trust their instincts, to read environments without relying solely on sensors, to understand that the absence of technology was not helplessness, that they had capabilities technology could enhance but never replace. Borum returned to his home system to establish a training center. He adapted ninjutsu principles to Vraxian physiology and culture. What emerged was something new, a hybrid fighting style that honored both human and Vraxian traditions while belonging fully to neither. It was something unique, something that could only have been created through this blending of cultures. Throughout the defense force, small changes accumulated into a larger transformation. Soldiers who had never heard the word ninja were nonetheless thinking like them, approaching problems from unexpected angles, trusting in skill and preparation over technological superiority alone. The philosophy had spread far beyond its origins. Minsu himself had become something of a legend, though he seemed uncomfortable with the attention. He continued to teach, to refine the curriculum, to push his students toward excellence. But his true satisfaction came not from recognition or fame. It came from watching his students surpass him, from seeing them take what he taught and make it their own, from knowing that the knowledge would continue long after he was gone.